after that. Another issue in Parliament is what I started with, that Deputy Minister designates will not be approved. Let's go back to Parliament and hear from the Deputy Majority Leader, Alexander Afenyomakin, speaking about the fact that some of those who were to be approved have not been.
A civil war begins in Finland on Wednesday. It is the very first such case to be partly heard on Liberian soil. Gabriel Masakwai.
I'm sure that the third report will be ready, and Tuesday, God willing, when we come back, same will be tabled, and then the appropriate motion moved for consideration. The work of Parliament, as Mr. Speaker rightly indicated, is founded on rules and procedure. The parliamentary jurisprudence is clear on what must be done at committee level and at plenary. To me, it's not about somebody's personal sentiment or somebody's personal disagreement. And for the record and for the avoidance of doubt, we are hearing that some nominees or a nominee might have had an issue with a member of Parliament, but that, to my mind, is a personal matter. We voted by consensus, and for whatever concerns that anybody has, I'm sure that on Tuesday we're going to resolve it. So there should be no need to be worried at all. On Friday, the House agreed, last week Friday, that the committee agreed to sit. And we did. Of course, some members were absent, but the work of the committee continued. We concluded our work. So there's no problem, and so far, I would say the leadership of the minority side has been very cooperative, and that has been the spirit within which we have worked. So I thank you so much, unless there are some questions for specific responses. Yes, please. I have indicated that we have some outstanding reports. Let's wait on Tuesday so that we deal with that one. We are done with all our hearings. We have presented some reports, 2 out of 3. Obviously, on Tuesday, you have the benefit of the third report of the deputy ministerial nominees that we considered. So let's not preempt whether or not somebody was approved by consensus or not.
Oh no, this is a yes or no answer.
That's what you think.
What made the committee decide to remove her name from the list?
Ab initio, I indicated that the posture of this parliament is as much as possible to build consensus. You recall that when we finished with Honorable Ejapamese's vetting, there were few issues out there in the media. The whole process has been that after each day's hearing, we take a decision. It is within the right of a member to express a concern. Sometimes a member may want to say that, right, I want to be satisfied on this matter. For the purpose of working together, you would want to give that space. So if you saw today on the House floor, Honorable Ejapamese's name was part of those that were approved by consensus. Meanwhile, it was out there in the media that he had been rejected. So it tells you that there are different stages in the consideration process. And it is the right of a member to express a concern. Legitimately so, when same is well grounded on fact or in law. It is only fair that the nominee is given the opportunity to address it. And I think that that has been it. So don't let us pick and choose. There is no controversy. We have built consensus on majority of them. The rest of them we have also taken steps to discuss further what we are supposed to do. And I'm saying that on Tuesday, the report will be laid, which will be the last report. Then we move on to do the special prosecutor.
I think we are specific about gifting
indicated that there is no such problem with any nominee. On the House floor today, the amendments that were made to the report was not an amendment in respect of a particular nominee.
Alexander Fenyamakin is Deputy Majority Leader in Parliament there. Essentially what he's trying to say is that there is no concern, there is no controversy here. There are just stages. We'll get Joseph Opoku-Gakpo to help us understand exactly what the concerns that have been raised by the minority are. But the Tamale North MP, Al-Hassan Suhuyini, says that he is glad that he got the support of the entire minority to push back on the approvals. Listen.
With situations that sometimes make it difficult for us to live above below the expectations of our constituents. Our conscience need to be alive to the obvious threats of especially corruption to our democracy. And I, unfortunately, in my interaction with the nominee during the vetting and after the vetting, I was left with the impression that this is a nominee who doesn't see anything wrong with what the CDD found out in relation to what she did during her primaries. That left a bitter taste in my mouth, and I thought that it needed to be addressed. If for nothing at all, there's a need for us to continue to keep the conscience of people alive, to the need for all of us to contribute our quota, however little, to the fight against corruption. We understand. In fact, there is a report that says that corruption in Africa, especially in our part of our world, is driven by the need of the society. So it is difficult for one to want to suggest that we can wish away corruption, or we can wake up and live in a society that is corruption-free. But the little steps that we make towards that must not be killed. And that will be killed when we begin to numb our conscience towards the fight against corruption. And so I was not satisfied, and I want to thank the leadership of the minority, the caucus in general, for the solidarity. In fact, it gives me inspiration that indeed, when it comes to doing what is right, when the approach and the circumstances and the situations are right, our side will always rise up to the occasion. So upon further consultations with leadership, it was decided that her name be stepped down today for further consultations before the House takes a decision on her. But I do not want this to be about me and how I felt. I want it to be about how, after my interaction with her during the vetting and after the vetting, left me with the feeling that this was a nominee whose conscience was not alive to the threat of corruption to the democracy that we practice.
A nominee whose conscience is not aligned to the threat of corruption. Not Al-Hassan Suhuyini there. Let me go to Parliament now. Joseph Opoku-Gakpo is standing by to give us the details. Hello, Joseph. Hello, Joseph. Joseph, I'm hopeful that you can hear me. So it looks from what the Honourable Member of Parliament, Al-Hassan Suhuyini, is saying, that he made the move for the withdrawal of the names of these people from the list. Is this accurate?
So his concern specifically had to do with Gifty Chuman-Pofu, who is actually heading to the Ministry of Education as the Deputy Minister designate. Now, as we've come to know, there are 3 of them, and the reasons vary. In the case of the other 2, that's Amidu Ishiaku Chinia, who is headed to the Sanitation and Water Resources Ministry, as well as Dinasuna Badapa, who is headed to the Office of the Attorney General as deputies. The concern that the minority raises is that, you recall last Friday, when the Speaker had directed that MP should go do tree planting, some vetting happened as far as these individuals are concerned. There were 4 of them who appeared, these 2 individuals plus Martin Ejime Sakosa and the Deputy Minister designate for the Foreign Affairs Ministry. So what we're gathering is that the reason why the minority insisted that they are not approving these other 2 plus Gifty Chumampofo as deputy ministers has to do with the fact that when it comes to those 2, they were part of the 4 individuals who were vetted on the Friday that Parliament was supposed to be doing tree planting, and the minority MPs say as a result of that, they did not show up to the House to come undertake the vetting exercise. And so, apart from these 2 individuals, we are expecting a final report on 15 other deputy ministers, which we also gathering the minority will again object to 2 individuals on that list because they were not part of that vetting process. So the 2 others has to do with the fact that the minority says they were not part of the vetting process because they thought they were supposed to be in their constituencies planting trees. And then when it comes to the deputy minister designate for the education ministry, the concern was raised by Hassan Suhini that when you look at the NPP primaries that unfolded sometime last year, there was the documentary that was put out by Corruption Watch, which is a CDD initiative, that claimed that she had given out up to 1,500 CDs and flat screen TVs to delegates as alleged bribe, which they got her to confirm that she did. And so Mr. Suhini had sought to probe that at the vetting, and she defended the practice. And for Mr. Suhini, that's an indication that she isn't very much up to the task when it comes to the fight against corruption, which is why he's kicking against her nomination. And then he says he had indicated to the chairman of the committee that he was voting against the approval. But when the committee's report came to the floor, the report said that they were recommending all these individuals for approval by consensus, which is why the minority pulled brakes on the process. And eventually what we saw was that the report of the appointment committee was amended, and the names of these 3 individuals were taken out, and the rest of the 12 were approved. And the indication is that they will be dealt with sometime next week in terms of the approval using a very separate process.
Sounds pretty interesting. We've heard from both sides now, Joseph. I want us to focus a bit more on the Finance Minister and his expected presence in Parliament to answer this specific question about the presidential jet. Yesterday, since the whole of this week, we've had a lot of conversation going on. We've had the Member of Parliament for North Tong, Samuel Okujeto Ablakwa, and who has been speaking about it. It looks like we'll all have to wait a little longer because the Finance Minister has been given some more time to come to Parliament to answer questions to this. Joseph, I want to come back to you so you tell us what has become of that today. But we can listen to Honorable Arnaud Dompre, who is a majority chief whip, in a banter with Honorable Okujeto Ablakwa on the floor of Parliament on this matter.
There were 2 questions I cited. One related to the aircraft, and the other related to the Finance Minister in terms of the volume or the quantum of funds spent. Those of you who have been in this house long enough, you know every Thursday we have a business committee meeting. And the business committee is a committee of Parliament. It's not made up of only the majority side. It's both sides represented on the committee. I chair the committee today. The majority leader, whom you all know is bereaved, was unavoidably unavailable. So I chaired the committee. Members of the minority were there. This matter came up. And we were reliably informed that the specific answer to that specific question was not ready at that time. And hence, we had to defer that question. And if you saw or witnessed it, the Honorable Minority Leader, when the Honorable Ablakwa got up and raised the matter, the Honorable Minority Leader got up and spoke to him to remind him of the decision at the committee level. Now, in this house, the tools that we use, statements, questions, and all that, all of us have explored it. But you see, to accept or not to accept a question lies in the bosom of the Speaker. And it's the Speaker that makes that decision. So if a member has a question, regardless whether the question has been advertised for in the order paper or not, you have a responsibility to follow up at the Speaker's Secretariat, especially where your leader has told you that the question has been deferred because answers are not ready. In my view, it's preemptive and quite unnecessary for the member to hold a press conference and begin to read meanings to words as if the minister is afraid to come and answer the question. Don't know if the minister was in the house today. He answered a similar question. So we must all come to an understanding that it is because the answer was not ready. That was why the minister didn't come to respond to that particular question. And we must get this clear enough.
This is about financial accountability. This is about financial prudence. This is about national priorities. This is about protecting the public purse, which the president himself pledged that he will do. So it's curious. It's very curious that on a matter like this, remember since we raised it, since my first publication, government has just stayed away. You in the media have complained about how difficult it has been for you to get a response from government. Now we've brought them to the more appropriate forum where they are constitutionally bound to be accountable. And there's all of these delay tactics. It must strike you as very strange because really, what do they have to hide? If you don't have anything to hide, if you have acted above board, if you are not trying to buy time, for whatever reason, I don't want to be accused of being, if you like, putting the cart before the horse or engaging in prejudicial commentary. But clearly, this is worrying. This is worrying. And it appears that it's as though something is happening behind the scenes, and they need time to complete whatever they are doing. You don't get a good sense. This, as I keep saying, is a sad day for accountability and for good governance. These are not the tenets of accountability of good governance. If you have nothing to hide, if you don't need to buy time to do anything untoward, you just respond and respond as quickly. I even thought that looking at the enormous public interest in this matter, government would not even have waited to be dragged here by urgent questions. Ministers could have come here with a statement, even before questions are filed. Yet none of that happened. What is so, complicated about this transaction that the Finance Ministry would need so much time, and the Finance Minister is not telling us even how much time extra he needs to respond?
That was rather press conferences held by both sides. You heard the Honorable Anodompre indicates that what Mr. Kojeto Ablakwa is doing is prejudicial because he has already filed questions on the floor to be answered. While Mr. Kojeto believes that this is a way to run away from accountability. Joseph Opoku-Gakpo is still in Parliament. Joseph, this matter has come up, of course, in Parliament and it's been talked about. Honorable Afenyo-Markin has been speaking about it.
Precisely. So Mr. Afenyo-Markin has been delivering what is called the business statements going into next week, which is actually an outline of the business that the House will deal with going into next week, right on the floor. And Mr. Ablakwa did put that specific question to him about what is going to happen to this said question, which eventually the Finance Minister did not respond to, although he was present on the floor of the House yesterday and he had asked for more time. And Mr. Afenyo-Markin's response was that this is definitely something that will be dealt with in the course of the week, except that he didn't give a specific date that they will then go ahead and deal with that. And the business statement document itself spells out the specific ministers who would come on specific days to respond to questions. But when it comes to the day the Minister of Finance would come respond to that specific question. It's not on the document, but repeatedly, the assurance from the majority side is that he will actually come next week to respond to this particular question.
Interesting. Well, Joseph, while we move away from that one, we know that the Minority Leader, Haruna Idrisu, has also indicated that his side will be filing a motion to seek a parliamentary probe into government's procurement of vaccines. Wrap it up for us with that information.
Well, on the floor of the House, he indicated that this is something that they are taking very much seriously. He says that by close of day today, that motion will be filed, seeking a parliamentary probe, a bipartisan parliamentary probe into government's efforts to go ahead and procure COVID-19 vaccines. We've heard from the minority MPs repeatedly draw attention to claims that the said purchases, the cost has been inflated and all, which is what they are trying to then get to the bottom of. This is a motion that we gather Mr. Kujetua Blakwa, who is the ranking on the Foreign Affairs Committee, Kwabna Mintakando, who is the ranking on the Health Committee, and the Minority Leader himself, Haruna Idrisu, who are the signatories to this particular motion that has to be filed. It will eventually have to be debated on the floor. The Speaker would set a date for its debate. If majority of MPs back it, then they would go ahead and set up that committee to then do this probe. And from what we're gathering, if that happens, it's likely to be a public probe, which will then have various ministers and other officials show up to come respond to questions, even as the committee members who will then be asked to take up the task, interrogate them on this issue.
Anything else we need to share with our viewers before we leave you, Joseph?
Just to wrap it all up, we've gotten additional disclosures on some of the other businesses that the House will be dealing with next week, apart from approving about 15 deputy ministers. We're also expecting that the Minister for National Security will be in Parliament to respond to a question on issues having to do with, you recall, we have the situation where DCOP Ayensu Parado retired, the Ashanti Region Liaison Officer, was allegedly hounded out of office by alleged Delta Force members. There's a question that has been filed by Nesnogbe seeking that the minister comes to the House to explain the circumstances under which the retired police officer left office as Ashanti Regional Security Liaison Officer. And the other critical issue that the House will be dealing with next week is a question again from some of the minority MPs demanding answers from the Interior Minister as to why DSP Azugu, the famous DSP Azugu, is still in office at the level of the Ministry of National Security, even after the Justice Emil Short Commission that investigated the Ayawasu West Wogan by-election violence recommended that the SWAT team that he heads be disbanded. So, looks like very interesting times next week in Parliament when it comes to the security.